All right. Good morning, Doug. We're back with more file Q&A. If you would like to ask questions of Doug, the best thing to do is join our file. There's information on that. It's our private member area. You can find out more about it in the description of this video. But before we get to the questions, Doug, a few news items that seem worthy of discussion. And most recently, I guess, is the prisoner swap of Victor Bout for the WNBA player, Brittany Griner. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. That's pretty interesting on the part of both of the swappees, actually.
Yeah.
You have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I remember, Victor Bout, right? He's the Merchant of Death. He's like the guy that that Nicolas Cage Lord of War movie, I think, is based on him.
Yeah, I think so.
I think he was just I never understood why he was even arrested by the U.S. I remember he was being held in Thailand for a couple of years trying to fight extradition to the U.S. And I didn't understand how him delivering guns to African countries was even a violation of U.S. law. But those were then the before times. Now I understand it doesn't really matter. They can do whatever they want.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that I guess if you look at like who got the better deal, I'd say, they did. I mean, they got somebody who's just really well-known person who I guess was at least the U.S. considered more of a danger to the U.S. And she's a petty, criminal, drug trafficking basically in Russia.
Yeah. Yeah. It's actually rather bizarre. And of course, completely predictably, Bout is being painted as a master criminal, the Merchant of Death and so forth. There are a lot of arms dealers in the world, and are they good guys or bad guys? Well, you could say that anybody that has an FFL, Federal Firearms License here in the United States, is an arms dealer.
Yeah, for sure.
Just small arms as opposed to major arms.
Fun stuff.
But maybe part of it is because Bout is a Russian. And of course, all Russians are the devil incarnate, notwithstanding the fact that he was actually a Ukrainian that became a Russian, but that's perhaps beside the point. But our arms dealers bad in themselves? And I would say the answer to that is no. He was apparently mostly selling arms in Africa. And who do you sell arms to in Africa? Well, you sell them to rebel groups. But since every government in Africa is a minimum a kleptocracy and worse, they're criminal organizations that have been enfranchised with running a state, I would say that anybody that's fighting against an African government is probably on the right side, notwithstanding the fact that after they win, they'll just become another criminal government themselves. But still, I think that this means that Victor Bout is neutral at worst, I think. And talk about arms trafficking. With the billions of dollars of arms the U.S. is facilitating to flow into Ukraine, I suspect most of those arms are going to be packed off to third world governments and will filter down into the hands of quote unquote terrorist groups. Some of them will actually really be terrorist groups, so that the whole thing is a dog's breakfast on Victor Bout's part. I have no idea personally whether he's actually a good guy or a bad guy, or even whether he'd be a fun dinner companion. I'll bet he would be. I'll tell you who wouldn't be a fun dinner companion, though. Bout might be. It's a stupid, what's her name? First name, Griner?
Brittany.
Yeah. Now here's a person who is clearly psychologically troubled, she's a 33-year-old woman who's had 2 marriages, both to lesbian partners. Apparently she's the butch part of this thing because she's had nasty dust-ups. I read her Wikipedia sketch on her, and she just seems like a real piece of work psychologically. I mean, troubled at a minimum, crazy maybe. And of course, she's always been overtly anti-US. She hates the US. And the only thing she's got going for her in today's context is that she's Black, kind of, and a militant lesbian, and plays good basketball. But so this whole thing is absolutely crazy. And then there's that Marine, that ex-Marine. I don't know
Right.
anything about him at all. You looked into him?
Apparently I only just a little bit. He was 4 years ago arrested. He went there to go see a former a colleague of his from the Marine Corps was getting married in Russia. He went to go to the wedding. While there, the Russian government claimed that somebody passed him a flash drive with some sort of secrets on it. The guy claims that just never happened. There's, never happened at all. It's completely fabricated, totally made up. And he's been sitting in prison, for 4 years now.
So was he working for the US government? But if you want to get a flash drive out of Russia, do you really have to go through all kinds of 1960s style spook stuff to do it?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I also think if he really was a spook, I think they would have gotten him out of there.
Yeah, it's all very strange. But well,
I was wondering what Victor Bout was actually convicted of, because what crime did the US think that he committed? And apparently he was convicted of conspiring to kill Americans.
Really? How? I mean, he's not a trigger man. And
nope.
For what reason would he want to kill individual Americans? I mean,
well, it's like the conspiracy stuff is the stuff that they seem to get a lot of people on, because they can, I mean, I think that the evidence can be pretty thin on that front. Yeah.
What do they say? You can get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich, and I'm sure that's true.
Yeah, and I mean, they paint the guy as a bad guy. No doubt. I mean, that's easy to do. So he's a bad guy, and he was planning to kill Americans.
Kill Americans. Well, there's no profit. Who knows? All we know is what we read in the papers, and it's unreliable at best and planted lies in many cases. So anyway, this is the best thing that's ever happened to what's her name, Griner.
Brittany Griner.
Brittany Griner, because I guess she was doing well before, but now she's world famous. She'll get many millions of dollars in book contracts and speaking fees and sponsorships, and who the hell knows. So this is wonderful for her, but I'm sure she's still going to hate America. No question about that.
Yeah, I don't see that changing. No way that's changing. Okay.
And Victor, at this point, even if he was, as was suggested strongly in Lord of War, he was probably working both sides. Selling arms was his business, but he was protected by the US in some cases, with some arms deals and all that.
Yep.
So now I'm sure if he didn't have any animus against the US before, he sure as hell does now. So we make friends and influence people all over. I hate to say we, it's the US government and the sociopaths that run it.
Yeah, don't want to take any responsibility for that.
No, of course.
Well, the other thing I think is very interesting that's happening is, something that came up as a topic in one of your books, and that is this sabotaging of power stations all over America. I don't know if there was this case last week where in the Carolinas, they actually were able to put about 35 or 40,000 people into a blackout by taking out 2 transformers. And apparently this is not the only place this has been happening in recent weeks in the US. So there's also in Oregon and Washington. And I know there was that test case years ago in California, it seemed like, but the fact it's happening in a couple of different states in the same week makes you wonder, what do you think's happening?
I think that if you want to create chaos in the US, the way to do it is not with a formal war where you have the US Army and Air Force and all the rest of that going abroad and shooting people. That's not how you do it. the way you do it, since, the US is the classic soft target. So question is they say that like 100 or 150 electric substations have been damaged in the last year. And the question is now, why would anybody want to do that? It can go anywhere from, hey, some kids out with the 22 and they just decide to, plink against the insulators, because we all have seen these substations. They have, chain link fences around them, and then you see these electric looking devices with the insulators sticking out everywhere. So who knows what they rate as being an attack. But if I was an evil genius and I wanted to destroy America for whatever psychopathic reasons, there are all kinds of ways to do it. I'm going to go into them all. I've thought about this a lot in the next novel, which is Terrorist, where our hero, Charles Knight, is accused of these things. Now, he's a good guy. He wouldn't do random violence like that. That's not his style, but he's accused of it because they don't like him. So there's all kinds of terrorism against soft targets that are ultra destructive. That's one of them. But I can think of a couple dozen others, which I'll discuss in the book, in the novel. Maybe I shouldn't, because a lot of these people that hate America aren't as imaginative that way, but they'll think of everything in the long run.
It's true. And this electrical grid though thing is, it's now pretty well established as a way to really do some serious damage. I mean, I think that there was some study that came out after that incident in California that said that talking about how vulnerable the US was, that between as few as 9 of these transformers and as many as 20 of them is taking those out is all it would be required to knock down the entire grid in the United States. Just 9 of these substations on the minimum and 20 on the max. I mean, that's shocking that it would be that fragile.
Yeah, it would take a long time to repair them because I'm sure that they don't have, massive amounts of spare parts for these things.
They don't even make them in the US anymore. They don't make them in the US.
Look, and you can go a lot further than that. I mean, the high tension electrical transmission lines, those giant things with it would be really easy. Anybody that's got dynamite, or for that matter, has an oxyacetylene torch, could bring them down. And then because these things all tie into one another, it would overload others. And
right,
you could have a coordinated attack that would create total chaos in the US with only 100 people. Now, it's hard to coordinate 100 people. So I don't know who's doing this. Hey, here's a thought. How about these Antifa guys? We haven't heard anything from them in the news. Not that the news is worth anything, but maybe some of these guys have decided this is better than just running around burning down a few buildings. Let's do that. If I was the FBI, that's where I'd go shopping for a suspect.
Yeah, but that's not where they're looking. They're looking, it's going to be some domestic, some domestic supremacist people or something like that. But I agree. I mean, it seems like it's more of the around the eco terrorism front. The people who think that we got to get off oil and get off energy right now. We're destroying the earth. It seems like it's a move that group would embrace more thoroughly.
Yeah, I completely agree. And of course, what the FBI, which has turned into a completely politicized group, is going to do is go after the kind of guys that put American flags on their rear bumpers instead. So,
yeah, I mean, this story got spun that the whole reason it happened in the Carolinas was to shut down some drag queen show or something. That's what it was.
Completely absurd from every point of view I can think of. It's just,
it's amazing, but they had that answer right away, as if, that had to be what it was. That had to be what they were trying to do. It's pretty insane.
Got to plant that meme out there, and then stupid people will say, well, I heard it was, right. And then it spreads. So I guess it's smart on their part, but it just shows you how dumb the average American is. But the average American is probably smarter than the citizens of most countries. So it
Yeah, I think
speaks
so.
poorly of humanity itself.
It does. So besides Echo terrorists, is there any other party that stands out to you that might be behind this kind of thing?
Well, eco-terrorists hate people in general, of course. They don't love the environment, but they do hate people. I mean, that's worth a whole discussion on that subject. That's one group. People that hate America is another.
Or if you're just trying to cause chaos here, honestly, just a general terrorist act. You know, shutting down the power grid is about the most damaging thing one could do to the U.S. I don't think there's any comparison, is there?
It is. Maybe it's just somebody that's bitterly. I suspect it's got political motives. So I feel confident, but it's not going to be right wingers that are doing that. It's just not. I mean, what's the point? Right wingers don't want to. Of course, they'll say, well, you know, you've got Jacobins and Bolsheviks in charge of the U.S. government and most state governments. So maybe you can say, well, maybe right wingers want to, but no.
Wouldn't they
I
do it
don't
in
think
DC
so.
though? Why would they do it? Why would they do it in North Carolina? You know, wouldn't they target like where the enemy lives in their mind?
I would think so. Yeah. Anyway, it's a mystery. And will the FBI solve it? I guess they'll pretend to solve it. We'll see if there are more of these attacks or not. But clearly, it's easy. I mean, just a small pod of people organized the way cells of terrorists are organized. So even if you find one, you can't get too far up the daisy chain. We'll see what they're going to do and how well organized they are.
Yeah. Yeah. The other piece of news that really stood out to me this week was the Bank of International Settlements warned in this latest report, quarterly report they have, that pension funds and other non-bank financial firms have more than $80 trillion of hidden off-balance sheet debt in the form of FX swaps. Now, I'm not even really sure I understand what that even means. Like, how can these non-financial firms, non-bank financial firms have why would they have FX swaps? Why would they be this big? And if they had this debt, why would it not be on their balance sheet? I just like, it seems very confusing to me in general.
You know, you're absolutely right, because we're both financially sophisticated, but 80 trillion, it was not billions, it was trillions, wasn't it?
Trillion.
Trillions. So this is an unfathomable number. This is several times the US GNP in off balance with pension. This doesn't make any sense to me to start with. And I guess at the center of this is the Bank for International Settlements, which is, I think that's in Basel, Switzerland. And it's run by Jabba the Hutt. You know, that
enormous guy.
That grotesquely fat guy is running it. I mean, this is almost like a parody of itself.
Yeah.
Well, on the other hand, there's all this debt in the world. And when you have a lot of debt in the world, as soon as somebody can't pay the debt, then, especially large amounts of money, you know, if you owe the bank $1,000, it's your problem. You owe the bank $1 billion, it's the bank's problem. Right. So with the amount of debt that we have in the world, these banks are all in trouble. But 80 trillion, I'd like somebody to explain that to me.
Yeah, and it's you know, this was just something, by the way, we just found this. This was unaccounted for. You know, like, where do you find this? It's so massive. How could it be hiding?
But then who is that minister, Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld?
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, we've lost $2 trillion and we can't find it. And that's still a continuing mystery, incidentally. So,
yeah, well, 9/11 happened the day after, if I recall, with that one. But then they did do another audit this week, or in the last 2 weeks, they published. And gosh, I don't have it in front of me, but it was, again, something like they couldn't account for half of their assets, something like that.
Yeah,
they could. Yeah. So they're still trying to do audits, and they said, you know, yeah, it was a failure, but we're going to keep trying. where you keep trying to audit the Defense Department to figure out where the money is.
Yeah, it's funny, the military is, I think, the only segment of the US government which is still basically trusted by the average American. But on the other hand, since I think about half of the actual fighting soldiers that we have are members of special operations groups. In other words, these are guys that, they don't spit shine their shoes and go on parade every day. They're basically special operators that wear beards and, write a novel about what they did when they get out of the SEALs and 50 other groups like the SEALs. So I'm asking myself, if I was a young guy who was qualified to get into those areas of the military, it's a perfect time of the century, and America's become the perfect country. You meet a bunch of guys that think like you do, and the amount of money that you can steal to set yourself up for life in the military, where it's all national security, nobody's going to investigate it, and if you do, we might kill you.
Yep.
So these guys, it's like that great movie with George Clooney and was it Ice-T? I forget, called Three Kings. I think was it?
Oh yeah. Three Kings. Yep, that was
the
great.
soldiers in Iraq, and they're going to steal Saddam's gold.
Yep.
I mean, absolutely.
Well, I mean, when you look around, it seems like plunder is happening everywhere. All like they got everything at every other level of government seems to be involved. There's some kind of a grift or just outright plunder happening everywhere. Why you have to expect it's ultimately going to be happening in the military as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think all we can really expect is chaos in the future. And maybe America's long love affair with its military is going to cool down a little bit in the future as the military increasingly goes rogue, which I think it will.
Yeah, and it's gone woke already, which certainly alienated it to a lot of Americans already.
Oh yeah, I think going woke it may be even worse than going rogue. So take your choice. Which do you like?
Right, exactly. Yeah, because going rogue against a woke military seems like a good idea.
Yeah, maybe the rogue types will decide, we don't like these woke types hanging around. Anything could happen. I mean, you could write 100 novels about the way that this is going to all work out in this decade. So with a little bit of luck, we'll get to see it, to see how it unfolds. It's like living in Rome in about the year 410, when the barbarians are at the gates. Can't wait to see what happens and who wins.
All right, well, let's get into some of these questions. The first one is from a couple of weeks ago. Someone asks, if you have a particular Asian artifact that you prefer for investment, and might you have a favorite dynasty for its rarity and its aesthetic beauty?
Well, having lived in the Orient for years, actually, I got quite interested in that type of thing, but I don't believe in investing in artwork to start with, because I actually watch on several websites that track these things, art auctions around the world, and expensive art, it's got to be a scam or a money laundering thing, as far as I'm concerned.
Has to be.
Got to be. It's just insane. So don't invest in art. I don't care what anybody says. Although somebody can, you find a Gauguin in a garage, and if can show the provenance, yeah, you'll make $30 million or something like that. But that's not investing. That's okay. Oriental art. I'm not crazy about most Oriental art. My favorite single piece of Oriental art is the Han Dynasty flying horse. If anybody doesn't know what that is, you should just Google flying horse. And to me, it's just an incredibly beautiful bronze statue. My favorite. I have several of them here in my house just because I like looking at them. I also have a Tang Dynasty formal horse. I'm a horse fan, always have been, from playing polo and all this type of thing. And I've got some Chinese paintings, which I liked, and I have collected, don't anymore, Chinese socialist realist art, which is as amusing as Nazi socialist realist art and Soviet socialist realist art. The Chinese do that too, pretty well. So, but to answer the question directly, look, when I was living in Hong Kong, I took Chinese painting lessons because I found it totally different style and everything's different from the Western. So I took Chinese painting lessons. Never got any good at it, needless to say, but it was interesting to learn some basic techniques.
Is there an aesthetic from one of the dynasties that you find more interesting or more appealing?
No, because we've got 2,000 years of Chinese history to think about. No, not really. Just, I think everybody ought to own one of those Han Dynasty reproductions of the flying horse because it's that good.
I have the formal horse one in front of me too. That looks pretty cool.
Yeah.
There's different versions of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's generally done in ceramics as opposed to bronze.
I can not surprised you like the bronze more.
Yeah. Yeah, it's simpler, more elegant.
Okay.
Anyway, investment, forget about it.
Not as an investment. All right. Well, let's get some more of these questions. Doug, what would you recommend to be the best course of action for a person in their 20s or 30s going forward? With so much time and so many ways to spend that time and relatively little market experience, how does one decide what investments to make?
Why don't you answer that to start with? Because you're closer to the 20s and 30s than I am.
Yeah, closer, seemingly further and further away every moment. Well, definitely is that way, actually. I think the most
speeds up as you get older too.
It's going real fast. Yeah.
Ground rushing.
The biggest thing in your 20s is that you should, it's your 20s set up everything else. If you waste your 20s, I think you can sentence your life to some course that you might not prefer. You know, because when you're in your 20s, you have unlimited amounts of energy. Lots of people are open to helping you. You don't have this sense of identity yet where like a job is beneath you so much. Your flexibility is super high. And, you know, if you are smart and creative and flexible, you can put yourself in a position where you can be in a hyper learning state. I mean, really learn a lot, be closely associated with people who can teach you a lot, you know, get some real skills in the workplace, whether it be sales or whatever else, just some real skills out there. And then enter your 30s with kind of I guess this book I read, I can't remember the name of it right now, but it's, she calls it identity capital. Essentially, you enter your 30s with you are known for something. You're known as you're a known entity already in the marketplace. There's people you've worked for, the way you've demonstrated yourself to be more effective and more successful than your peers, you know, maybe known for doing a certain thing particularly well. Or I don't know, but I think if you enter your 30s that way, then you can focus on earnings in your 30s and really dramatically increase your income if you do your 20s right. But if you find yourself waiting until your 30s to try and do that stuff you should have done in your 20s, you'll find, you know, you won't have the same flexibility. You'll feel like too much work is beneath you, you know, and you won't have the same energy already. It will have dissipated quite a bit by the time you're in your 30s. So the 20s matter more than anything else. You can't waste them. Cannot waste them.
Yeah, well said. I thoroughly agree with you, Matt. You're absolutely right on that. Yeah, no question about it. What should you do in particular? And the process really ought to start when you're your teams, because I guess you made your money as an entrepreneur. So we had somewhat different paths up the mountain.
Well, but I started off working for other people. I had to, you know, so, I mean, until I was basically from 18 to 25, I had to work for other people, you know, to get some foundation and stuff. And, but then after that, yeah, it was on my own.
Yeah, and of course I always was too. I mean, from quite early on, I mean, after I figured out I was a pure commission salesman where you can make very good money, and I did make very good money, which financed my running around the world and traveling a lot. And then I got into the mining finance business. And one thing you said is become well known for something. And of course, I wrote my first book, The International Man, when I think I'd already visited, like, I wrote that book when I was 30 approximately. I already visited about 35 or 40 countries. And
Which is an extraordinary thing, especially then at that time period.
yeah, but it's becoming extraordinary again, because traveling was hard in those days for one set of reasons, but now it's getting hard for a different set of reasons, you know.
Yeah.
So,
But
and
yeah,
anyway,
being known for something. Yeah, you definitely had a reputation already by the time you hit 30. And I think that makes a huge difference. The book I was trying to recall the name of it is called The Defining Decade. The Defining Decade. I think for young people, it's really, really important to read it.
listen, I'll toss this out now. We were talking about this privately before, and I asked you if you knew anybody that could give me a hand, because as you're aware, I've wanted to write this book, tentatively titled Renaissance Man, for years. And it basically would be a guidebook for somebody in their teens or 20s of what you should learn and do to set yourself up for the rest of your life.
Yeah. And how to do it.
You should go and do and learn, and, you know, so you have a guidebook, at least a written mentor, if you don't have a physical one, so you don't waste your time. I mean, not that getting drunk and chasing girls isn't, you know, entirely a waste of time, but
how about you just limit that to one night a week?
that's what I would say. Yes. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, the reason I bring this up, if we have any listeners out there, anybody who's a competent writer who thinks the way I do, and would like to get a jump start to establish himself in this business, well, reach out. And how to...
Yeah, best thing to do is probably get me on Telegram, which the information is in the description below, but otherwise it's at Matt Fias, You can find me there.
Yeah, because if somebody can show me that they are qualified and competent, I'm too lazy to do the book. And what's in it for me at this point? I mean,
you just would like to see it done.
Yeah, I just like to see it done. So I'd work with that person, and I think we'd get it published and sell some copies, probably make some money, maybe a lot, maybe a little. You can't tell with books. There's a million of them published every year.
Yeah,
but anyway, this is an
for this.
opportunity I'm throwing out there for listeners.
Yeah, the hard thing is you got to be a competent writer, and it's a very difficult skill, So if you've got some good experience in it,
yeah,
so
yeah.
Okay. All right. Next question. Let's see. The sheer amount of money that are pumping into Ukraine, along with the multi-year plan for this war, starting with the first and second color revolutions in 2004, 2005, it makes me think the plan has been for a massive war in Europe for a long time. So my question for Doug is, if Germany has unaffordable energy, which has to be transported by ship, and if its industries are destroyed through the high cost of that energy, how the hell do these criminal imbecile planners think that Europe is going to fight Russia?
Well, look, Russia, I'll give you my view, and who knows what's going on in these people's minds. Russia doesn't want to fight anybody, in my opinion. They absolutely don't, including the Ukrainians. They just wanted to solve a problem, and it's gotten out of control. And it serves, this is not ancient times, when if you've started a war, you invade a country and you steal the artwork and you steal the gold and you steal the cattle and you steal a bunch of slaves. And yeah, at least to start with, that could be a really profitable enterprise, that kind of war. That isn't the way it works anymore. Okay. So the Russians, I'll tell you what, if I'm going to put my finger on something, I say that the criminal forces in the US government, the deep state, basically want to see the Europeans and the Russians kind of just about destroy themselves so that then the US would be the world's hegemon.
Yep.
Take out those two things and forget about Japan. And China is on its way to destroying itself. So I'll bet the psychopaths in the deep state within the Washington Beltway, I think they're behind all of this stuff, frankly.
Yeah. Some of our German friends told me, and I wasn't really aware of this historical perspective, but that the great fear of the Anglo world, so the Brits and the Americans, is that the Germans, who don't have any real particular problem with the Russians, on its face, they don't have any real natural issue with them, that they join forces, that they end up on the same side of something, because those two countries on the same side would really put up a real rival to the West. And so trying to make sure that didn't happen has been part of America's foreign policy since after World War I. Is that any truth to that?
Yeah, I think there might be. I think there might be indeed.
Because I don't think, if you think about it, if the U.S. was concerned about Germany's benefit, I doubt we would have participated in the destruction of the really important pipeline that flows into Germany, but we did. And Germany, when that happened, the first thing I thought of is, I'm surprised. Germany ought to declare war on the U.S. for this. It's clearly an act of aggression by the U.S. and by other Western countries against Germany specifically, and against Russia, but to a lesser degree as well. So, yeah, I think that it does seem like the U.S., the stated foreign policy relating to Ukraine and Russia is to use that environment to suck Russia in and to constrain its military and bleed them dry. Like, that's the stated U.S. policy around that right now. So I don't know if they plan to turn. They're all say at the same time it's happening to Germany as well, as they're going to be deindustrializing.
Yep, I agree completely. So more reason to fear real chaos in the world during this decade. Because related to that is, it doesn't matter if the Republicans, who are worthless, are worth less than nothing. They're worse than worthless. They're actually a negative influence. Even if they're elected in 2024, the deep state, these people that live in and around the Beltway and control the bureaucracy, and they're not going anywhere. They're going to stay the same place, regardless of who the glib face in the White House is. So yeah, I think you're right. This is the dying gasp of a dying empire, which is the US. But it's like a dying giant dinosaur. It's actually most dangerous in its death throes, because it's going to be thrashing around stupidly everywhere, destroying everything. And it's
trying to hang on.
So yeah. Anyway, that was a good question, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. Okay, Doug, next question is, do you keep a journal? And if so, what's your process?
I don't keep a journal, but it's one of the reasons that I'm very glad that I got into writing books, which are kind of an informal journal, if you would. But more than that, writing my newsletter, which I started writing that newsletter in, when did I start writing that newsletter? It must have been 1979.
Wow.
November of 79. So I wrote it every month up until like 2005 or 10. You can see how I don't keep track of these things, because I don't. And then I started doing a blog on the internet, which I do regularly now at internationalman.com. So the answer to the question is, No, I don't do a journal. And if I hadn't had a reason,
Publishing deadline.
yeah, yeah, like writing a book or writing a blog, a responsibility, I wouldn't have written it. Although sometimes I wish I'd kept a journal, personally.
Yeah. Well, that's, I mean, when you go back through all those issues and you talk about where you traveled to in that month, some interesting people you encountered. I mean, they're as good as any journal.
Yeah, it is. It is. I'd like to find all those old newsletters and go through them sometimes just to retro rock.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good way to do it. I mean, I definitely think the idea of publishing something is a way to make sure you do keep journal. And I think, right. I do think that it actually is really good. If there ever was a time to write a journal in my lifetime, it would be now, I think, because there's so many things that are happening now. You can almost lose touch with the passage of time and with reality, because it seems like so much is happening all at once right now. So I think it's useful for that. And I also, there was a really interesting usage of this new chatbot, this GPT-3 chatbot AI, and I sent you some of the results of that chatbot, Doug, that I saw.
Oh, yeah.
But one thing, the most interesting thing I saw somebody do, they didn't do it with the chatbot, but they used it with that same technology, is they inputted 2 years of their journals from when they were 8 years old till 10. And the conversation they have with themselves, with this child version of themselves, is actually, it's uncanny. I mean, it's very weird. It's very strange. And you can see like the vulnerability of this 10-year-old kid talking back to that person. It's very strange. So, I mean, there's gonna be all kinds of interesting things that can be done with this data to help you, to maybe, now, I mean, your kids and your grandkids probably are not going to want to read these journals, but the form that they might take in the future using technology to help, like they could perhaps have a conversation with you, after you're gone, if that stuff is important to you at all. So I think that's particularly interesting. And I also just think it's useful, if you can do it, to keep sane as the world gets crazy and crazier.
Yeah, there is an advantage to it, no matter how you do it, to help crystallize and organize your thoughts.
Yeah.
Because if you have to put it on paper, it has to make some kind of logic, some kind of sense. But if it's just inchoately spinning around in your mind, well, not really.
It's an impression. It's an impression more than even a clear thought at that stage.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a real advantage to writing a journal. And if you can get the journal published and get paid money, that's even better. That's what I did.
Yeah. I know what a lot of people do is they just, they publish whatever randomness, whatever they're, on Substack or one of these other free applications, because the act of actually publishing, even though if they don't have anyone reading it, just like a lot of people do YouTube videos and no one sees them, that actually does, again, help them think more clearly, help them become a better writer. And, you can hold yourself accountable to it being done. Did you publish or not that day is the question. So,
and it really is important, I think, to learn to write properly, because in some ways you're only as alive as you can communicate. And if you can't communicate with other people, then you're not fully alive, perhaps.
Yeah, you mentioned that point before. I think that's pretty profound. Okay. All right, next question. Is the formation of government a natural occurrence? Is there a best form of government? And would you agree with Plato's governmental hierarchy?
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, I think governments arise kind of naturally, but in an unnatural way. That reference to Plato, I didn't look this up, but Plato basically said you've got, if this is the right reference, in his Republic, which deals with how he'd structure a state. He says you've got gold men, who are the ones that run the society, the politicians and so forth. Then you've got silver men that are in the military. And then did he have bronze men and iron men? If so, the bronze men would have been, the merchants and the rich guys. And the iron men would have been the people on the bottom, but maybe they were just iron men below the silver men. I forget. But unfortunately, Plato had it exactly backwards, because the way I see it, they say the cream rises to the top. Well, yeah, but you know what cream is? It's actually scum. That's what actually what it is.
Yeah.
And the scum floats on top of the pond or whatever. So the people that Plato calls the gold people, the rulers, they're the poorest and worst types. And then the military guys, yeah. But then he goes into, he's got it all backwards. The productive people are on the bottom. He's got it upside down. So that's what I think about Plato's organization of society. And as far as government's concerned, I think that governments are basically run by whatever group of thugs that can take over a society and lord it over them, physically and economically and socially. And they can do it a number of different ways. But I just don't, it would be a rare thing if rational people got together and decided, all right, let's structure our government this way because we need a government, which is highly questionable in my opinion. The only thing that comes even close to that is the founding of the US. I don't know of any other governments that were founded on a rational constitutional basis. I don't think the idea of a constitution even existed before the US Constitution. I mean, I don't think so. Not a formal drawn up constitution.
Yeah. And I mean, and that's interesting because it basically starts with the rights of the citizenry rather than, starting from the point of view of the objectives of the people in power. Right. But the one government that seemed, and I don't know that much about it, but it seemed to be organized from the top down and at least seemed to operate with efficiency and fairness to some degree was Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore, at least during his life, right?
It's true. The Singaporeans got lucky in that Lee Kuan Yew was an authoritarian, no question about it, but he was rational. He didn't have a criminal mind. He really wanted, that's right. You can have, Plato had a word for it too. Not the noble ruler, but the philosopher king.
Philosopher king.
Yeah, something like, So, like 1 out of 100, you get that guy in office, doesn't get killed, doesn't get corrupted. Yeah, okay, that's okay.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's not like living in Singapore was ideal, but
no,
it worked. You could get rich. Nobody bothered you I don't like keeping my nose clean in the way that Lee Kuan Yew
would require it.
Yeah, you can't say what you want and so forth, but okay. But you're right. I mean, that would be in the top 1% of all governments in the world's history, probably.
He asks, is there a best form of government? Like there isn't a form of government is there a form of government that is necessarily more virtuous than others?
Well, it's not a democracy. You have to discuss this whole meme of democracy, which is so problematical, where everybody talks about our democracy. We got to have democracy. And nobody ever talks about, well, exactly what is democracy and so forth. And we could talk about that, but it would just be a government that ensures, well, I think it should just be a Randian government. If you have a government, it ought to just be there to do nothing but defend you from violence. An army to protect you from violence abroad, police to protect you from violence within the country, and a court system to allow you to adjudicate disputes without resorting to violence.
Yeah.
That's it. Absolutely nothing else. Nothing. And
that's
that would be,
is that what they call a minarchist?
I guess you'd call them a minarchist. Yes, that was what that would be, but it never stops there. It always gets out of control for all kinds of different reasons. I'd be happy enough in a world like that. I really would. But of course, I'd point out that those three things I just mentioned are so important to keeping order. They're too important to leave to the kind of people that go to work for governments.
Right. Exactly.
So the market I believe, could do all three of those things better
Yeah.
than.
Well, and especially, and the thing is, you'd have to assume that even if that were done right, like if you had if it were a democracy set up like that, it would clearly not work long at all, right? Because wouldn't eventually the voters decide that silence is violence, and the other crazy things that people have decided, right? A democracy isn't the ideal form of government, it seems to me. I mean, this ends up being a mob rule.
Yeah, and if you look at the average person, reasonably knowledgeable about running his own life, but doesn't know much about anything outside of his bubble. We all have our little bubbles. Some of our bubbles are bigger than others. But look at the average person, and then you got to figure that half the people, by definition, are less than average. So how can you have a democracy when that's the case?
Yeah. Yep, agree. All right, Doug, next question. Are you going to Freedom Fest next year? If so, they'd love to have a drink and a cigar with you.
I love to have a drink and a cigar with anybody that wants to have one with me. Well, almost anybody, I suppose. But am I going to Freedom Fest? I understand it's going to be in Tennessee next year.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to go back to Vegas, because I don't want to fly in the US anymore. And I've come to hate Vegas also.
It's just a shithole.
Yeah, it's a shithole. It really is. And so, and I don't even like conferences anymore, frankly. There's a time and a place for everything. And I've done enough conferences, and I don't like giving speeches particularly, and they really don't serve much of a useful purpose, quite frankly. So I'd say the chances, I've been to every Freedom Fest since the first one, and the genesis of Freedom Fest between Mark Skousen and myself is interesting, but this isn't the time to talk about that. So if I go to Freedom Fest this year in Tennessee, I suspect it's going to be my last one, and I may not even go.
All right. Okay. Last question. Can you tell us a little bit about your relationship with Harry Browne? See, he says, it was from Mr. Browne's 1996 presidential campaign that I learned about the Libertarian Party and came to realize that I was a libertarian.
Yeah, I really loved Harry. We were quite good friends, actually. And his book, How to Profit from the Coming Devaluation, it's a brilliant book, incidentally, even though it was written back in, when did you write that? 69, early 70s, something like that. And clear, concise, totally correct. And I read that book, and it was a major, major influence on my life, and got me off in the direction that I took, for better or for worse. And said, God, I'd like to meet Harry. And I did. How did I meet Harry? I'm trying to think, when did I meet Harry? I know, my friend Bob Kephart, he used to publish, and Kephart was one of the grandfathers of the whole investment newsletter business, along with, say, Richard Russell and Jim Dines and a couple other guys like that. So anyway, I was working as a contractor, independent consultant for the Inflation Survival Letter. That's what it was called back in, when was that? 74, something like that. And so Harry had a new book out at the time. Maybe it was a Swiss banking book. And Bob said, you ought to interview Harry in person. And I said, absolutely. So I flew to Zurich,
Hmm.
and Harry and I got along immediately, really well. And Harry was a night owl, and he would regularly stay up. He's like my wife, frankly. She stays up until 6 o'clock in the morning all the time. And Harry would always do that. He'd stay up until the break of dawn.
Hmm.
And so we did that a couple of times, and became friends then, and better friends. And when he ran for president on the Libertarian ticket, I think I was the largest donor to his campaign. I hate the Libertarian Party. I mean, I understand they've changed a little bit, but
Yeah, they've improved.
yeah, they're basically nothing. Nobody's swimming around in a toilet bowl. So I was the largest. What did I give Harry for his campaign? Like 50 grand, 60 grand, something like that. It was a lot of money back in those days.
Yeah. Wow.
Especially for me, it was. I mean, it wasn't like I was, so anyway, he was a great guy. He had a great sense of humor. Harry could have been a stand-up comedian. Almost whenever Harry gave a speech, it was laugh a minute. It really was. I mean, he was very clever, very subtle, very wry. This guy of, immense goodwill, very well educated. So he was a great guy. I'm so sorry he kicked the bucket.
Yeah. What was what was the biggest influence he had on you?
Logical, critical thinking.
Hmm.
He was extremely intellectually honest. He wouldn't let himself get away with sloppy thinking or half-baked ideas. He was very good that way. And if you read his books, you'll see that that's throughout. I think that was one of his very strongest points. Very intellectually honest, and he wouldn't let anybody get away with bullshit.
I wonder, the world could use a few more people like that right now, because their intellectual honesty is so rare and the bullshit is thick.
Yeah, it really is. It's a pity. I mean, listening to like the best thing on television for news/opinion, I think the Greg Gutfeld show is actually the best because he's funny.
He is funny. He's very smart.
Yeah, and he's smart. And I like his sidekicks, Tyrus and Kat, too. But then you got Tucker Carlson, who's also good, but he's not intellectually honest. He says all kinds of shit that is just not true, or he's slanting it or he hasn't thought it out or whatever like that. And then after him, I don't know who else there is. I mean, I'm sure I'm missing somebody in the, mass media, which is getting less mass all the time, thank God.
Yeah.
But no, Harry should have had his own talk show.
Yeah. Wow. I should, there must be some old speeches of his on YouTube, I'd imagine. Must be some things that he's got. I'll have to go dig
Yeah,
up.
but Harry died. When did Harry die? It must have been 20 years ago. I'll have to check.
Yeah, but I see old videos like, interviews with Ayn Rand, from a long time ago, interviews with all kinds of people. So I would imagine there's something on there.
Got to be some, but not in the kind of volume that we have today where everybody does a blog or a podcast.
Yeah, no chance.
Yeah, it's too bad.
Yeah.
Oh, well, sic transit gloria mundi.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, we'll leave it there for today, Doug. Thank you very much. And we'll be back next week. I'm sure there'll be plenty of news for us to discuss. Once again.
Absolutely. Washington will make sure there's plenty of news.
That's right. All right. Thank you.